He's an incredible friend to me, and he's been a source of wisdom to me in personal ways and in professional ways, but consistently. When President Trump asked me to go have these meetings at the White House, the guy I called up and said, "Will you come with me?" was Aaron, because I trust his judgment. And as I said, he has wisdom. The word wisdom means a knowledge of God's will. It means an instinct for right and wrong and what's right to do in every situation. And Aaron has that, and I have so much respect for him and so much love for him. And I wish I could be in this room with you to hear him talk tonight, but I'm going to have to listen to the tape later. Anyway, my friend, Aaron Siri. Here he is.
Mainstream media, kill it, Bobby. Kill it, man. So I was asked to come and talk about mandates, and in particular about college mandates. And so I was thinking about mandates, and I was thinking about what I was going to say here tonight. And of course, I also was thinking about React 19's mission with regards to folks who've been injured by COVID-19 vaccines. And as I was thinking about what I was going to say, I realized that in many ways, mandates and the safety of vaccines very much go hand in hand. They go hand in hand because when you think about mandates, when you think about coercing somebody to do something, when has that been done in our time and throughout history? It's usually been done when people in power can't persuade you on the merits. When they can't persuade you on the merits, they turn to coercion, mandates, force. But when do they need to do that? Do they need to do that with water? If you don't drink, we're all going to die. Do they need to do that with the chicken you're about to be served? Nope. They need to do that when they want to force you to do something that probably has some issue, risk, whether it be a risk to your body, to your immortal soul, because it violates your religious beliefs, or some other form of risk. The intersection of, especially when it comes to products and mandating vaccines, really intersects with safety. Because if there were zero safety issues, if there were no concern, then you probably wouldn't even need the mandate to begin with. You wouldn't need to coerce people. Except for my 9-year-old, he will not eat his healthy food. But I'm not the government, so in my house, I'm allowed to set any rules I want. My kids tell me all the time, I have a right to freedom of speech. And I'm like, no, I'm not the government. You have no right to speech in the house. This is called a parentocracy. When you go up to folks, when most people go up to somebody and they say, hey, I've been injured, I've been hurt, I've got something bad happened to me. The typical reaction for most people is sympathy, empathy. But when you add the word vaccine before the word injury, it doesn't always get the same reaction. Mothers, fathers, children, neighbors across this country have suffered devastating injuries from COVID-19 vaccines. That's just the truth. That's a reality. There are many joys that have been stolen from these people. Many of them will never know the serenity of a day without any pain and suffering ever again. That's just a reality. And it's a very uncomfortable reality for some. Many of these folks who are injured by COVID-19 vaccines are everyday Americans. They trusted the federal health authorities. They trusted the medical organizations. They went out and got the shot thinking, safe and effective. And when they had an issue, when they were injured, what did they do? They often went back to those very same institutions, pleading, sometimes crying for help. I trusted you. I got the shot. I'm now seriously hurt. Help me. And what do they get in return? Often they get no reaction, no response, no assistance, no even appearing interest often in investigating what went wrong to not only help them, but avoid the issue going forward. If they had went back and sought assistance and said they were injured and not vaccine injured, maybe they would have gotten a different reaction. The proof of what I'm saying, of the differential that occurs when you're injured by a vaccine, to see that proof, you need look no further than the existence of React 19. React 19 is the testament, the living proof of what I just said. If our health authorities and our medical organization institutions had done what they were supposed to do, had stepped up, had treated those who were injured, had had the humanity, the decency, or at least just did their Hippocratic oath, if nothing else, and stepped up and treated those who were injured, React 19 wouldn't need to exist. It exists precisely because they're not doing their job, because it's a vaccine injury, not an injury. I had somebody ask me earlier, tell me a heartbreaking story of loss from a COVID-19 vaccine. And they said to me, how could this happen? Why is nothing happening? Why is nobody doing anything? And that question is asked of me over and over again. How can it be? React 19 has, is it 19,000 members? I'm seeing a higher number. 30,000 members. I presume most of whom have had some serious injury from COVID-19 vaccine. That's one group. One group. That is 30,000, I presume mostly folks in America, all Americans. 30,000 Americans, one group, seriously injured from the COVID-19 vaccine. How can the cacophony of that much suffering and injury that probably distributes across this whole country just be ignored by our health authorities? That is the question I'm often asked. And I think to understand the answer to that question, you have to understand the paradigm into which COVID-19 vaccines fell. There is a well-established system of how vaccines, economically, regulatory-wise, are treated in this country. Without understanding that backdrop, without understanding the framework in which COVID-19 fell into, it's hard to understand how health authorities and medical organizations could be so callous. So I'm going to talk a bit about that structure and that framework that COVID-19 vaccines fell into. Try to keep it a little bit light and exciting because I believe it's a dinner conversation, but I'll try. The genesis of the current paradigm in which vaccines fell into is the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act of 1986. As its name says, next slide, please. It was passed in 1986. This is the harbinger of the paradigm into which COVID-19 vaccines fell into. Product safety, product in America and in most places, there are two ways you assure product safety. You invited a lawyer, so you're going to get a lawyer answer. Just not my doing. There are two ways you assure product safety in this country. The first way you assure product safety is, and this is the most critical way, the most important way, is market forces. Products are made by companies. Companies exist, and I'm no economist, but I believe they exist to make money because they want to make money for their shareholders. And so the most effective way to assure a company doesn't make a product that injures people is to make sure that if they injure people, they know they're going to have to pay because that hurts their bottom line. But what happens when you tell a company, hey, don't worry, you can sell your product no matter what injury it causes, you don't have to pay? It creates an incredible moral hazard. There's virtually no product in America where you cannot sue the manufacturer for the injuries that that product causes. The main exception, pretty much the only exception that has robust immunity is it nuclear warheads? Let me see what's dangerous out there. Grenades, full barrel machine guns, vaccines. A product that you are told over and over like a mantra that are safe and effective, that are given to babies over and over again. Vaccines have virtually complete immunity to liability. You cannot sue a pharmaceutical company pretty much. Pretty much. There are very narrow exceptions for virtually any injury from a vaccine. That is 37 years of unchecked market forces on an industry that is very smart and knows how to make money. 37 years of them marketing their products. Car manufacturers advertise their products. They want you to think it's great. So do other product manufacturers. Pharmaceutical companies do that too. They want you to think their product is great. And the pushback, when you see something bad about a car in the news, it's usually from a lawsuit. That's right. But you're not going to see that for vaccines in the news because you can't sue them on class actions. The class action lawyers, the product liability attorneys have been neutered, to put it mildly. They're nowhere to be seen when it comes to vaccines. So you've gotten rid of the most important, the most essential way you assure product safety. Market forces, gone. 37 years without any stopgap on the pharmaceutical companies. The second way you assure product safety, it's a far less effective, far less effective way, is regulators, government. And they can have an impact, not as effective as the natural pushing of market forces, of self-regulation, which is what market forces cause. But regulators have a role. The problem is that the regulators here, which is the Department of Health and Human Services, under which you have the FDA, CDC, NIH, they are hopelessly conflicted. They're hopelessly conflicted because not only are they responsible for safety, they are also responsible for promotion of vaccines. And those are diametrically opposed. They're in utter conflict. For example, the Department of Transportation promotes transportation in this country. They want more airplanes. They want more airlines. Well, Congress recognized if we let the Department of Transportation grab hand with industry and promote transportation, it's hard to shake hand and say, hey, get more airplanes in the air, at the same time smack you for not having safety planes. So Congress said, oh, well, we should create a completely separate agency, the National Transportation Safety Board, separate from the Department of Transportation. One promotes transportation, one assures safety. Same thing, for example, with nuclear power plants. The Department of Energy promotes creation of new nuclear power plants in this country. The Nuclear Regulatory Authority, completely separate, independent, is responsible for the safety of nuclear power plants. Again, it's hard to go in and say, hey, build that nuclear power plant and shake hands and push industry and work hand in hand with them and then slap them at the same time. It doesn't work out so well. My 9-year-old can do that to me really well, but it doesn't work out very well in the regulatory environment. But when it comes to vaccines, they're not separate. They both exist in the Department of Health and Human Services. And the promotion function has totally overtaken the safety function. Not immediately, not in a day, but it's been going on for 37 years. I'll also point out that not only are the health authorities responsible for safety, they are also responsible for literally defending against any claim of vaccine injury. For all vaccines other than COVID vaccine and something called the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Program, the Vaccine Injury Compensation Program, and for COVID vaccines currently in the CICP, where do you bring the claim? Health authorities. The fact that they've become hopelessly conflicted and the fact that these health authorities literally view that their mission is basically completely aligned with the pharma companies, you don't need to take my word for it. Next slide, please. This is a report from Congress from 2000 in which the conflicts from the majority staff report from the Committee on Government Reform, United States House of Representatives, and they went and they looked at the FDA and CDC vaccine committees, ACIP and VRBAC. You're all familiar, many of you are probably familiar with those committees at this point. And here's what they found. Quote, the overwhelming majority of members, both voting members and consultants, have substantial ties to the pharmaceutical industry, end quote. That's Congress saying that. You'd think that after this is a scathing report, the CDC and FDA would feel the need to clean up their act and maybe uncouple themselves from the pharmaceutical industry. Next tab, please. Here's another report from 2009 from the HHS Inspector General, finding, again, pervasive conflicts of interest within our federal health authorities. So there it is. 37 years you have had this paradigm developing in this country around vaccines, in which pharmaceutical companies have been unchecked in terms of market forces and have been unchecked by regulatory health authorities. That is the paradigm in which COVID-19 vaccines fell into. And it's critical to understand that, to understand what has happened with COVID-19 vaccines. Didn't happen overnight, happened over a long period of time. And during those 37 years, pharmaceutical industry has a few $billion-a year kitty to protect their profits, their products. And they do it very, very well. They've got 1,400 lobbyists in Congress. I'm aware of no, at least formal vaccine safety lobbyists in Congress. Maybe React 19 will have the first one. And so they're able to lobby to pass laws to continue to protect their profits. They spend money endlessly on medical organizations, medical journals. Their money flows through virtually every inch of the medical establishment, to the point where pretty much everybody in the medical community, for the most part, with very brave, notable exceptions, many of those doctors in this room tonight, will repeat and parrot the mantra, safe and effective, safe and effective, safe and effective. There are people who've heard that so much they think it's from God, I'm sure. Next slide, please. Dr. Angel was the editor-in-chief of the New England Journal of Medicine. These are her words. She's currently at the Center for Bioethics at the Harvard Medical School. She says, it's no longer possible to believe much of the clinical research that is published or to rely on the judgment of trusted physicians or authoritative medical guidelines. I take no pleasure in this conclusion, which I reached slowly and reluctantly over my 2 decades as the editor of the New England Journal of Medicine, end quote. That is the result of decades of pharmaceutical money flowing into journals, medical organizations with no check, no market check, no regulatory check. Just want to make sure I really drive home, this is not an abstraction. This is real. This is real business and real money. Pharmaceutical companies are not to be laughed at or taken lightly. They're very smart. You give them a few $billions a year that they then can use to protect the continued flow of those billions of dollars, they're going to do that. And they're going to keep doing that. And we'll talk about solutions at the end. But let me pivot now back to COVID-19 vaccines. So that's the paradigm in which COVID-19 vaccines fell. So when you look and you say, whoa, how can these regulators just ignore us and these medical organizations? How can this be? It's because COVID-19 vaccines just fell into the same exact regulatory market framework that all other vaccines had fell into. From the perspective of regulators, medical organizations, and so forth, there's no difference. VRBPAC, ACIP, business as usual. Just a little more rushed, maybe. Here's the proof. Anybody know of any lawsuit against Pfizer or Moderna for an injury from one of their COVID-19 vaccines? No, none. 30,000 people seriously injured from COVID-19 vaccines in just React 19. Not one lawsuit. PrEP Act immunity. And if that wasn't applicable, it would have been the same 1986 Act we looked before. They have double immunity, frankly. Sure. I was asked to say a bit more about the PrEP Act. So I explained before the 1986 Act and how that provided immunity. For the COVID-19 vaccines, there is actually another layer of immunity, and that is something called the PrEP Act. That is when there is an emergency of some form declared by the Secretary of HHS that they believe certain countermeasures should have even higher protection than the 86 Act provides, basically. And what PrEP Act immunity provides is actually complete blanket immunity to the pharmaceutical companies. In fact, under the 1986 Act, you actually could technically still sue, for example, for fraud, just if you could get the proof and plead it. Under PrEP Act immunity, if you had proof, if you literally came to me and said, here it is, I have a recording of all the meetings of people in Pfizer sitting together, plotting, scheming, I could show you abject fraud under the PrEP Act as written, put aside whether I think it's constitutional, as written, the Department of Justice or the HHS regulatory authorities would have to actually first bring a case for that fraud before any lawyers could do that. Any other lawyers like myself, civil litigators, could do that. That's an incredible amount of protection. In fact, when I saw it the first time, I couldn't believe it. I literally couldn't believe that that was in the laws, but there it was. It goes back to what I said earlier. Pharmaceutical companies are not to be taken lightly. They are very smart. They have lots of money. They have lots of lawyers, and no doubt, your hat has to go off to the lawyers in the pharmaceutical industry that wrote that bill. It is an incredible level of protection. PrEP Act immunity, there you go. So PrEP Act immunity, but even if PrEP Act immunity didn't apply, which eventually, presumably, it will eventually go away, the 1986 Act immunity will continue to apply to COVID-19 vaccines. So there are no lawsuits for injury because you can't sue them. Market force is gone for COVID-19 vaccines, just like other vaccines. Do you think that if we could sue Pfizer and Moderna for COVID-19 vaccines, they'd be on the market long? I give them a day. How about the FDA? Are they doing their job? COVID-19 vaccines? No, they're not. Next slide, please. This is the homepage of the FDA website. Does this look like a regulatory authority to you? Now, aren't these the people that are supposed to evaluate whether this product is safe and effective before it's licensed? What does that say right there? Bivalent vaccine boosters. Are those licensed yet? Oh, no. Oh, they're not licensed. Kind of looks like a promotional ad to me. I don't know. Maybe. I mean, it's incredible. But this is reflective of what I'm talking about. The FDA doesn't view itself as a regulator that has to assure safe and effective. They view themselves as partner with these products. Peter Marks, who is the head of the biologics division, of the vaccine division at the FDA, in fact, can you skip ahead could you go to the next slide, please? He put out these promotional videos, again, about unlicensed products. This is literally the person who's deciding on whether or not, for the most part, COVID-19 vaccines are going to get licensed. And he has got these cutesy videos about why I should get an updated COVID-19 vaccine now, which is not even licensed, by the way. Do you think this man views himself as truly responsible for the safety of this product? No, he sees himself, he believes, I think, he sees himself effectively as a partner with industry to get these products out there. I think he thinks he's doing a good thing. He thinks, I assume, that even if there are safety issues, he's saving more people than he's hurting. So he's good. So he's doing a good thing. I got to assume that. Because assuming he doesn't truly just totally callous would be, that would be a really scary thought. So I'm going to assume that. That would give him the benefit of the doubt, that that's what he thinks. And that's how he justifies to himself. But that's not his job. His job is not to promote vaccines. His job is to ensure they're safe and effective to the FDA standard. And I don't get me started on my thoughts on what that standard is, but at least to their standard. There's no way after he has gone out, promoted this product, told every American to get it, there's no way he can objectively do that evaluation. Nobody very few people are able to have that type of introspection and go, hey, you know what? Remember that product I told all 270 million of you that went and got this COVID vaccine? Oops. Sorry. Yeah, I know I was doing these videos, promoting it, telling you all to get it before it was even licensed, but I kind of messed up. Unlikely. One last point on the FDA, and if this doesn't drive it home, I don't know, nothing will. I assume many of you know Maddie DeGarry. Maddie DeGarry is one of only about 1,000 and change children who participate in the 12 to 15-year-old clinical trial for the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine, who got the shot. She's in a wheelchair, feeding tube, and I can tell you, we have now gotten the internal report that Pfizer submitted to the FDA explaining what happened to Maddie. When I read it, I thought, they're capitulating. You read it and you're like, okay, the vaccine did it. They're all but admitting it. And then the very last line, the principal investigator paid by Pfizer says that he does not, quote, can't make this up, feel, that's the word, feel, he doesn't feel. I don't feel like having chicken. I don't, I don't feel like doing a lot of things. And this guy apparently doesn't feel the vaccine is related to Maddie's injuries, despite all of the medical records and her entire chronology. TikTok video dancing, totally fine to debilitated, no other explanation. Initial emergency reports reflecting that it was the vaccine. But this guy doesn't feel it's related. And we have the email that Peter Marks reviewing that report. You know the guy right there? Oh, this guy, right here. Mr. Just a Minute. Mr. Just a Minute, who's deciding on licensing COVID-19 vaccine, says, basically, I'll paraphrase it. Great. Principal investigator says I don't feel it's related. Done. That was it. That is your regulatory authority in action. It's incredible But that's the FDA, and that's the process they did. But that process did not start with COVID-19 vaccine. It started over 37 years of just a regulatory agency basically unchecked and conflicted and viewing itself as a promotional arm for these products. Well, what about the CDC? Let me hurry this up a little bit. It looks like I don't want to keep folks too long. CDC. Next slide, please. Well, the CDC decided that they're going to do an analysis of VAERS data. Everybody's familiar with what VAERS is, the Vaccine Adverse Events Reporting System. And they preset something called proportional reporting ratio analyses, in which they were going to use these preset formulas to see whether or not there are safety signals with the VAERS data. Well, guess what? They set up an equation basically where if the N was greater than 3, the number of cases, and the PRR was greater than 2, that's a safety signal. Now, I'm just a lawyer, no mathematician, but I believe 73 for cerebral thrombosis is bigger than 2. And I believe as we go down this list of very serious reactions, these numbers are far greater than 2. These numbers, this data, had to be clawed out of the hands of the CDC through Freedom of Information Act requests. They didn't just make this available to the public. The analysis that they were going to do was available in a report, but clearly once that analysis didn't show what they'd like, they were not making that available to the public, not without a legal fight. But here it is. And the CDC's response to this? Well, actually, we're going to do something called empirical Bayesian analysis by the FDA. And the FDA did this empirical Bayesian analysis, so we don't have to worry about this. And so we said, great. Can we see the empirical Bayesian analysis data? What do you think they did? No, you can't have it. And we're now in federal court trying to get that data too. And let's see what that says. And I suspect they don't want to give it because it might show something similar, maybe, maybe not. And I wonder what the next excuse will be. That's your VAERS system for you. That's what it showed according to the CDC's own analyses. Frightening, scary numbers. Next slide, please. And then there's the vSafe. vSafe is a different safety system that the CDC specifically rolled out for COVID-19 vaccines. The whole purpose of the vSafe system was to assess the safety of COVID-19 vaccines. It was rolled out in December 2020 when the first COVID-19 vaccine was shipped out. 10 million Americans signed up for vSafe. 10 million, okay? And they almost all signed up in the first 5 or 6 months after the COVID-19 rolled out. Who was getting the shot in the first 5 or 6 months? Were those the people who didn't want the shot? No, these were the enthusiasts. These are the people who signed up, and they signed up for vSafe just to report all kinds of stuff. They wanted to participate in the excited about the new vaccine. For a year and a half, we fought with the CDC to get this vSafe data, the check-the-box vSafe data, because they were publishing study after study after study using this data to say COVID-19 vaccines are safe. They have over 20 studies where they rely on mostly what? You guys know, VAERS data and vSafe data to say COVID-19 vaccines are safe. That is what they rely upon. They say it over and over again like a mantra. You know, if you hang out in the CDC, FDA enough, you think that's from God too. These 20-something studies are also basically the core. They're the heart of the scientific literature that the CDC relies upon to say COVID-19 vaccines are safe. And in all 20 reports, when they published the vSafe data, they published only the first week of people reporting needing medical care after the COVID-19 vaccine. We finally got that, which by the way, was sometimes 0.5%, 0.25%, 1%, depending on the demographics, depending on the shot, the age, and so forth. Which, by the way, I don't know why that's somehow comforting, but CDC thought it was. But when we finally got the full data set, it's 7.7% of folks. When you look at all the weeks, not just the first week, 7.7% of folks using vSafe reported needing medical care after a COVID-19 vaccine. You could see that on this chart because on the top right, you see there were 20 million users, and the little red bar shows 0.8 million, about 800,000 required medical care. 70% of those were hospitalized. emergency room or urgent care, okay? It's bad. It's not good when a product injures people, but that's not surprising. Drugs injure people all the time. But what we don't expect, what we really don't expect, is that our federal health authorities will hide and effectively, I'll say mislead to be kind, mislead the public for a year and a half about what this V-Safe data showed. The core data they were saying, they were relying upon, say COVID-19 vaccines are safe. They only released a week of the data, and it's not like nobody was asking. We had 2 federal lawsuits, actually, to get this data, and they finally gave it to us. 7.7%. Next slide, please. I'll show you one last piece of this, and I'll wrap up. When they designed V-Safe, we actually got a copy of the version 1 of the V-Safe protocol, and you could see it's from November 19, 2020. That's before the first vaccine was rolled out. You know, it's really hard to prove somebody's mental state. It's really hard to prove somebody purposely and knowingly did something wrong, committed a crime, what we call scienter in criminal law. It's very difficult. I think this provides some really damning proof about what CDC was thinking and doing vis-a-vis COVID-19 vaccine safety. This is the last page of the protocol that was used to design the V-Safe system. And what you're going to see here at the top, these are adverse events of special interest. They're pre-specified medical conditions. And when you look down this list, you are going to see many of the serious issues that people ended up experiencing with COVID-19 vaccines. This is before the vaccine was rolled out to the public. This was at least a month before the first shot COVID vaccine was authorized for public use. It includes, look, blood clotting, myocarditis, pericarditis, transverse myelitis, seizures, stroke, transverse myelitis, serious issues. Here's the damning thing. Did they include these as pre-specified medical conditions in V-Safe? They did not. They did not. The only thing CDC included as check-the-box options in V-Safe were around 10 conditions that they say are totally normal from vaccines. Pain in the injection site. Not kidding. I can't make this stuff up. The 10 conditions are the same conditions that they say are totally normal after a vaccine. And guess what? They only collected it for 1 week after the shot. They're exactly the conditions they tell you are totally normal. They were reported at the rates of 50, 60, 70%. CDC said, great. This is actually good. This shows reactogenicity. Shows the vaccine's working. Shows you're having an immune reaction. What did they leave off that list? Everything here. They didn't even ask about whether you had heart pain. How about that? How about asking just about chest pain? How about any of the symptoms of these conditions, at least, if you don't ask about these conditions? To me, that was purposeful and knowingly done by the CDC. And when you think about scienter, when you think about purposeful conduct intending to produce a harmful result, I think this shows some clear proof that the CDC knew these vaccines could cause potentially these issues and chose to leave them out of the V-Safe system, because if they tracked it, then they would have a rate. If they included a check-the-box option, for example, myocarditis, and 500,000 people reported it out of the 10 million, they would know it's 5%. That data would be really damning for them. So instead, they left a free text field that you could type stuff in if you wanted to. And they're saying that that can't be released to the public. The other thing that the CDC ignored, and I think this is also critical, and I won't belabor it, I'll just say it quickly, is what went on in countries that didn't roll out the COVID-19 vaccine. How come we're not studying Haiti? How come we're not studying all these other countries that have virtually no COVID-19 vaccine uptake and have minuscule amounts of deaths? And this argument I've heard, oh, well, they don't have great healthcare tracking systems. They got better tracking systems than we have in the United States. The United States has one of the worst healthcare tracking systems in the world because we don't have centralized healthcare. In many of these countries, developing countries, they have centralized healthcare. They are all going into the same database. They can tell you down to the 9.2346% of the kids have DTP vaccine. How do they know that? They're tracking it because they got centralized healthcare. This argument that, well, Haiti doesn't have a good healthcare system or these other countries is nonsense. Many of them have very good centralized medical healthcare systems. They could track it, and they are in many ways reflective of the differential between what happened between countries that took this shot, those that didn't. I'm going to wrap up on the COVID-19 vaccine, then I'll talk about solutions by just pointing out one case, and this is of Dr. Gregory Poland. I don't know if anybody here knows that name, but he is one of the leading vaccinologists in our country. He is the director of the Mayo Clinic's Vaccine Research Group, and I think the story of what happened to Dr. Gregory Poland, I think, is so emblematic of everything I just said. At least I think it is. Dr. Poland, who is, hobnobs with Paul Offit and Dr. Marks and everybody else, when they get together, he is in there. He is literally one of the leading voices that pushes vaccines in this country. He suffered a vaccine injury after COVID-19 vaccine. I'm going to read you his own words about his vaccine injury. He suffered tinnitus, which can be a debilitating condition where you constantly hear painful, excruciating ringing in your ears if it's bad enough. He described it as this, quote, "was like someone suddenly blew a dog whistle in my ear," end quote. Quote, "has been pretty much unrelenting," end quote. Quote, "can only begin to estimate the number of times I just want to scream because I can't get rid of the noise or how many hours of sleep I've lost," end quote. Quote, and then he says, when he went public with that painful condition, he says he can't sleep at night. He says he went public here, and here's what he says happened when he went public. Quote, he says in his own words, "What has been heartbreaking about this, as a seasoned physician, are the emails I got from people that this has affected their lives so badly that they have told me they're going to take their own life," end quote. Dr. Poland goes on in his article to estimate that there may be, there may be tens of thousands. He estimates millions of people worldwide with this serious debilitating condition. Excuse me. Now, you would think, thank you so much, appreciate it. Now I know I've been talking too much. It's a good thing I'm not live, because if we were live, my wife would be watching. She'd be texting me, "Wrap it up." Now, you think that since this happened to a vocal, world-renowned, nobody could question his credentials, pro-vaccine to the hilt, vaccine scientist, at least tinnitus, at least this condition will be taken seriously, right? Let me tell you, now let me read you a quote, how the medical organization that reported this, what they wrote in this article. Quote, "Ongoing research efforts to understand if COVID-19 vaccines may be related to various auditory complaints, including hearing loss and tinnitus," end quote. And that there are, quote, "no definitive studies on the subject," end quote. Oh, it gets better. There are 24,000 reports of tinnitus in the CDC vaccine adverse events reporting system. Let me read you the CDC's quote. Quote, "The data from safety monitoring are not sufficient to conclude that a causal relationship exists between vaccination and tinnitus," end quote. How about Pfizer? What does Pfizer have to say about this? Quote, "Tinnitus causes have been reviewed and no causal association to the COVID-19 vaccine has been established," end quote. Wow. 24,000 reports of tinnitus in VAERS. This world-leading vaccinologist is literally reporting he has the condition himself from the vaccine. He says it's from the vaccine. He's not saying maybe. He says it's from the vaccine. He's getting emails from people around the world telling him they're going to kill themselves. They're going to end their lives because they cannot live with this condition. What does Dr. Poland have to say in response to those statements? Right? Maybe he gave some pushback. Well, let's read together. Quote, it's literally what he wrote, what he said in response to all of this. He said, quote, or at least this is what I should be more accurate, what he said in the article. He said, quote, temporality, right, meaning these things being close in time, tinnitus and COVID-19 vaccine, is not causality, end quote. He goes on to say, rather, comma, it forms a hypothesis. And then what you do is carefully collect information to determine this potential syndrome or side effect above and beyond the background rate before there was a COVID vaccine before there was COVID or a COVID vaccine, and is the rate different in people who got the vaccine and people who didn't, end quote. Who's going to do that study? Pfizer? Wait, what did Pfizer say? Oh yeah, it says there's no causal, it says it already concluded there's no causal relationship. Okay, so they're not going to do it. How about CDC? So industry's not going to do it. Why? They have no market incentive to do it. They'll never do it. You know who might have done it? Class action product liability lawyers. They'd have dug and dug and dug. And they might have gotten there. But Pfizer will never do it. And there's nothing in the market that I see that will force them to do it. Or I don't see any moneyed interest out there that is going to push forward and get that study done. They're not cheap, they're expensive, they're time consuming. Somebody has to do them, and industry's not going to fund them, and there's no moneyed interest out there to do it, as far as I'm aware. And that leaves our regulatory authorities. Dr. Mark's going to do it. CDC going to do it. Agency that wouldn't even release the V-Safe data. And I hope that brings it home. Here it is. Here is a world-leading vaccinologist that suffered a debilitating condition himself. And his response, the dogma is so powerful, even within his own mind, that even he says, yeah, but temporality doesn't prove causation. It's just a hypothesis. I guess he's a hypothesis. He's a living hypothesis. What he is, he's a living reflection of the incredible dogma that results when you have 37 years of unchecked, basically corporate hegemony pushing in one direction with no moneyed interest pushing back in the other direction. The reality is the only injuries they're ever going to recognize from COVID-19 vaccines are the ones they absolutely cannot avoid admitting exist. For example, thrombosis with thrombocytopenia, right? When you have TTS, when you've got blood clotting, but you have lower platelet counts. Usually when you've got blood clotting, you've got higher platelet counts. So it's not normal. And when they saw cases of that, they were like, well, that's pretty hard to avoid. They can't hide that in the background rate. But tinnitus happens other ways too. They can hide that in the background rate. Neurological issues, background rate. Most of the issues you see from COVID-19 vaccine, they can hide that, so to speak, in the background rate. I would make you a prediction that if COVID-19 vaccine were rolled out like other vaccines, slowly, incrementally, where only a very narrow cohort of people got it every single year, such that myocarditis, pericarditis in the childhood population and young adults in particular slowly rose, probably never ascribe it to the COVID-19 vaccine. It was just that they gave it to 270 million people. And the rate amongst children, the differential is so massive, they couldn't avoid that one. And they couldn't avoid TTS. But man, they're going to fight like heck to say none of the others are actually caused by COVID-19 vaccine. In fact, and I think the one story I heard was there were a number of physicians and others who were injured by COVID vaccines, complaining of neurological issues, on a call with Dr. Marks. And he bragged about how they spotted TTS after 6 cases. And they're on the phone with him, telling him, we have serious debilitating neurological issues. And he's telling them, but we don't see a signal in the FDA data. And they responded to him, and he again brags about TTS, and he says, but look at that, we picked that up with only 6 cases. And they said to him, there are more than 6 of us on this call telling you that we have this neurological issue, many of whom are physicians. Okay. So, with all of that said, I'd like to leave this on a hopeful note because I am actually very hopeful for the future. But you have to understand the problem to fix it, and I hope I've laid out my view of what is causing the problem. The first solution, the minimal solution, and this brings us all the way back finally to mandates, is that at the end of this long litany of horrors and failures has got to be the right to say no. And that's, maybe we can't change the law with they have 1,400 lobbyists or fix FDA, CDC, but at the end of all of that, every American needs to always have the right to say no. Without that right, all of those things that we just talked about, that is the very last stop on the train of protection. And I'm very heartened to say that I believe that we are moving as a country in the right direction in that regard. You know, I've been doing vaccine litigation, that space for a long time, long before COVID. And if you told me 4 years ago, that in our lawsuit, a class action lawsuit against the United States Air Force, where we got an injunction preventing the Air Force from kicking out over 10,000 members of the Air Force who refused the COVID-19 vaccine. If you would have told me that when the Department of Justice appealed that decision to the Sixth Circuit, over 20 attorney generals in this country would file an amicus brief, meaning a brief in support, that they would be filing that in support of our position, I wouldn't have believed you. But they did. And over 20 states in this country now actually have passed all kinds of laws protecting people's right in various forms, whether it be for religious reasons or otherwise, to say no to a vaccine, as a matter of conscience or otherwise. As another example, we just had a lawsuit where we got a decision in this Monday in Mississippi. Bobby mentioned it, so I'll bring it up again. Where the state of Mississippi, for 44 years, has not had a religious exemption. It was taken away in 1979. I think I did that math right. And now, for the first time again, parents can finally send their children who have religious belief convictions, where they're convicted not to vaccinate, can send their children to school in the state of Mississippi. So I'm incredibly hopeful that we are moving the right directions in terms of rights, and I'm really, really hope that universities, especially those who are producing so many of the leaders of tomorrow, understand that when they mandate, when they don't persuade on the merits, and they try to get what they want through bullying and coercion, they are teaching the absolute wrong message to the leaders of tomorrow. Everybody in this room, I know many of the folks here, are each fighting in many different ways. And everybody, sometimes it might feel like you are fighting on your own, but you're not. Look around this room. Everybody in this room is fighting in different ways. There are doctors in this room who are fighting. There are lawyers in this room who are fighting. There are folks who worked in pharmaceutical companies who left who are fighting. And every one of them, every day, is contributing to that fight. And everybody just has to keep doing what they're doing. And I do believe that eventually not only will we be able to restore our rights, but we'll also be able to break this unholy alliance between pharmaceutical companies and the regulatory agencies for the betterment of COVID-19 victims and everybody else in the country. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.